Hello everyone and welcome back to Now Politics. Sorry that I wasn't able to post a video yesterday, Thursday. I had some things to work on. However, today we'll be talking about the first debate of the Republican presidential primary, which occurred on Wednesday night. I, like many other Americans, tuned in to watch the candidates for the Republican nomination for president debate and tell voters why they should be the candidate. Now, the debate, as well as the night as a whole, in which an interview between Trump and Tucker Carlson was posted on X or Twitter, gives us a lot of insights and takeaways about the state of the Republican primary and about how things might shape out in the coming months. So let's talk about the debate specifically. In summary, for each of the candidates, I'll say this. Doug Burgum and Asa Hutchinson proved to be unserious candidates from the very beginning. Their candidacies in this primary will essentially serve to dilute the Republican playing field. Tim Scott, while he was given more attention and time, failed to raise momentum for his campaign, was not able to excite any voters. Ron DeSantis was not able to prove himself as a distinct player in the Republican playing field yet again. Chris Christie underperforms expectations. Mike Pence and Nikki Haley outperform expectations, and as predicted, Vivek Ramaswamy becomes the central figure, the central spotlight of the debate. So I would characterize the debate we saw Wednesday night just like how I would characterize the 2016 debates, a combination of clamoring among many of the candidates, as well as a lot of uncharismatic showings and performances by other candidates. Let's go over the clamoring first. Vivek Ramaswamy, right? He is a fresh candidate, has a lot of energy, extremely well articulated. He is the best articulator amongst everybody on the stage. He is best able to really dissect into the social issues in the country, which he talks about a lot. He talks about this void of purpose, of family, nation, God, merit, all these values which people are missing, which people are void of, explaining a national identity crisis. That's a really great way to try to connect to the root values of the average Republican voter, talking about the void of these particular values in the country, which we don't seem to be as abundant of. So he does quite well in, explaining his vision of where he wants to see the country, of what values he wants the country to build again. He gives pretty aggressive policy points, I must say. He is, that one person who's willing to challenge the old guard of the GOP, especially when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to how to reduce the size of the government. He's pretty fresh to in regards to economic issues. So a very, very bright person, someone who could be defined as a extremely well-versed articulator. And as such, he gets clamored on a lot throughout the debate. Now, the way he gets attacked is not the way I initially predicted. He does get attacked a couple of times by Chris Christie. He does not get attacked by Ron DeSantis. And there may be actually a pretty good reason for why he is not attacked by Ron DeSantis. Now that I think about it more, originally I thought Ron DeSantis would attack Vivek, and I think the main reason Ron DeSantis really chose not to go on Vivek and really stay plain and simple throughout the debate was because of that memo which was leaked by the super PAC supporting him, Never Back Down, which outlined some steps he should take during the debate. One of those steps was to quote unquote hammer Vivek Ramaswamy, and if he did choose to quote unquote hammer Vivek Ramaswamy, and the general public knew about the leaked memo by his super PAC, which advised him to do that, then he would have been looked as like a completely scripted candidate. So that's probably why he chose to do a last minute reboot of everything he would do during the debate and chose to be completely unconfrontational. In addition to Chris Christie, who really actually attacked Vivek based on his personality as well as based on his inexperience, instead of attacking him for supporting Donald Trump through his indictments per se, because we all know that Chris Christie came to this debate primarily to slam Donald Trump and his proponents. Vivek was attacked by a lot of the second tier candidates I characterized in my previous video, which talked about the primary debate. He was attacked by Mike Pence, attacked by Nikki Haley, a lot of those second tier candidates. Now, originally, I thought that Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, all these second tier candidates, they would essentially be debating amongst each other about what kinds of status quo establishment traditional GOP policies to enact. But instead, Mike Pence and Nikki Haley really went after Vivek. Mike Pence dedicated this entire debate towards attacking Vivek Ramaswamy. And now that I think about that as well, there's a pretty good reason for why they did that. Mike Pence and Nikki Haley have had pretty rich experience, both politically and governmentally speaking. They've held many political and governmental positions for years. They have really, really rich political and government experience. Mike Pence was a former congressman, a former governor of Indiana, and our former vice president. Nikki Haley was a former state legislator, the former governor of South Carolina, and was also the former US ambassador to the United Nations. So these people have had so much experience in government and politics, and now they see this guy who has had zero political experience, zero governmental experience, come out from nowhere and essentially just surge past them in the polls. And now he's in third place for this primary. So they really get irritated about that. So throughout the debate, you'll see how Mike Pence and Nikki Haley really try to attack Vivek Ramaswamy, capitalizing on his inexperience, and they really try to shower down their own experience in politics and government onto him throughout the debate. So we're going to go over some of these excerpts of fights between Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, as well as Chris Christie and Vivek Ramaswamy on the other side. So Mike Pence and Vivek Ramaswamy do their first feud with regards to the economy. Let's look. I'll have to speed through. Yep. Right.
100 years. All that being said, I was the first person in this race to say that we've got to deal with the
So he's going to start attacking Vivek right now.
Debt issues. You got people on this stage that won't even talk about issues like Social Security and Medicare. I mean, Vivek, you recently said
See, there you go.
a president
right
can't
now.
do everything. Well, I got news for you, Vivek. I've been in the hallway. I've
What?
been in the West Wing. A president of the United States has to confront every crisis facing America. I will put our nation back on the path to growth and prosperity and restore fiscal responsibility, just as I did in Congress and as governor,
Mr. Vice President.
and when I was vice president.
But,
Yeah,
I mean,
hold on.
yeah, you were named earlier. I'm going to give Vivek first.
We'll get to both of
Yeah,
them.
this isn't that complicated, guys. Unlock American energy.
There you
drill,
go. Look at
frack,
the energy.
burn coal, embrace nuclear. Put
Really
people back to
straightforward.
work by no longer paying them more to stay at home. Reform the U.S. Fed, stabilize the U.S. dollar, and go to war. The
Pretty
only war that
aggressive
I will
policies,
declare
you could
as U.S.
say.
president will be the war on
It's
the
a fresh
federal
look.
administrative state that is the source of those toxic regulations, acting like a wet blanket on the economy. So I'm not sure I exactly understood Mike Pence's comment, but I'll let you all parse that out. For me, it's pretty simple. That's something a U.S. president can do with focus, and I'll deliver on
Well,
it.
let me explain it to you. Vivek, if I can. I'll go slower this
Look
time.
at Ron DeSantis'
You know, I
face.
sometimes struggle with the reading
Look,
comprehension.
I was a House conservative leader before it was cool. I actually pushed a deficit reduction act. That was the last time we actually reduced the national debt in the United States, when I was the leader of House conservatives. I balanced budgets and cut taxes when I was governor. I mean, look, Joe Biden has weakened this country at home and abroad. Now is not the time for on-the-job training. We don't need to bring in a rookie. We don't need to bring in people without experience. We need to bring
Hold on. It's 30 seconds when you have a rebuttal, okay? And you are up, Governor DeSantis.
So you see what happened right there? Mike Pence, who essentially, I should say, dedicated this debate to attacking Vivek as much as possible, tried to really just shower in his experience on Vivek. He knows Vivek is a fresh candidate. He knows he's a very energetic candidate. He knows he has pretty aggressive, firm, fresh policies for the GOP. You'll see that in terms of the economy, in terms of the foreign policy, but really in terms of reducing the size of government. And so he wants to point out his experience compared to Vivek's zero experience to try to show that he has more credibility on as opposed to candidates like Vivek. There is another feud I want to show you between Mike Pence and Vivek as well, and we'll just have to speed up from here. So let's go to 41 minutes of this debate.
Approaches can play a role here too. We're in the middle of a
So here I believe the candidates are debating about mass shootings or violent crimes occurring throughout the country. Vivek is trying to point out that all of the violent crimes occurring in the country is due to a major mental health epidemic. And the reason we have this epidemic in our country is because we have lost our purpose in this country. People have lost the purpose which used to define us. And he, again, uses those names: family, nation, God, merit. He is trying to point out to the audience that we're in a national identity crisis, that these mental health issues are happening because people are void of purpose, and we need to rebuild those purposes into our national identity, need to rebuild our national identity. So that's where he goes about. And just look at the response from Mike Pence, who again tries to counter him.
middle of a national identity crisis. And I say this as a member of my generation. The problem in our country right now, the reason we have that mental health epidemic, is that people are so hungry for purpose and meaning at a time when family, faith, patriotism, hard work have all disappeared. What we really need is a tonal reset from the top, saying that this is what it means to be an American. Yes, we will stand for the rule of law. Yes, we will close the southern border where criminals are coming in every day. And yes, we will back law enforcement because we remember who we really are. And that's also how we address that mental health epidemic in the next generation that is directly leading to violent crime
Can I
across
speak
this
on behalf
country.
of
Governor
the American
DeSantis,
people
really
here?
quickly. Governor DeSantis.
We don't have an identity crisis, Vivek. We're not looking for a new national identity. The American people are the most faith-filled, freedom-loving, idealistic, hardworking people the world has ever known. We just need government as good as our people.
Well, Mike, I think the difference is you might have, some others like you may have on the stage, it's Morning in America speech. It is not Morning in America. We live in a dark moment, and we have to confront the fact that we're in an internal, sort of cold cultural civil
You
war.
are
And we have to
equating the
recognize
American
that
people
in order
with the
to actually
failed
win.
government in Washington, D.C. We just need government as good as our people again.
So, let me just finish addressing that slogan, because I don't know what that slogan means. We need to shut down the administrative state. That's actually how we translate it.
Crime has been on the rise in Florida, Governor DeSantis.
So again, what is Vivek's message? Our country has an identity crisis where people are void of purpose, family, nation, God, merit. He uses names such as patriotism, faith, hard work, same ideas, but he does this to really try to connect to the root values of Republican voters, the root values of his audience. He tells them we have to revive those values, revive our identity. And what does Mike Pence say? No, our people already have strong values. Our people already have a strong national identity. We just need to make a good government, a government which could fit those values. We don't have a government which fits those values. That's the problem, Vivek. And I, using my superior experience, will deliver us a good government which will match the values of the people. But don't try to match the people or equate the people with the bad government. That's Mike Pence's message, really, to Vivek Ramaswamy. So that's the second feud we see. Now, the next excerpt I'm going to give you in this debate is really about foreign policy, and it's a feud between Vivek Ramaswamy on one side and Mike Pence and Nikki Haley on the other side. What's Vivek Ramaswamy's message on foreign policy? Let's stop giving so much money, so much resources to things which don't directly help US interests. Let's stop giving money to Ukraine, or else we're gonna fuel a war which puts Russia and China closer together. Let's use our money and resources to take care of the homeland first. Build our border, build domestic defense systems, all that. And Mike Pence and Nikki Haley are saying, no, we have to protect Ukraine against Russia. We have to support them. We have to support other countries in their struggle for freedom. We are a country which must defend freedom all around the world. So you're wrong. We have to give Ukraine support, Vivek. You can't put a dictator over pro-American nations. And Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy also spar on how much money we should be giving to Israel, so on and so forth. So let's look at that feud. And again, they use his experience against him. That's what essentially happens. So we'll go to 1 hour 2 minutes.
Hollowed out cities. This is a symptom of America's decline in one of the
Right here.
This was mentioned. You get 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, let me be clear. Anybody that thinks that we can't solve the problems here in the United States and be the leader of the free world has a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth.
That is incorrect.
We can do both, Vivek. We've done both. We've been the leader of the free world and the arsenal of democracy for years. The Reagan Doctrine years ago made it clear. We said, if you're willing to fight the communists on your soil, we'll give you the means to fight them there so our troops don't have to fight them. Vivek, if we do the giveaway that you want to give to Putin to give him his land, it's not going to be too long before he rolls across a NATO...
So part of Vivek Ramaswamy's policy with Ukraine is to freeze the lines of controls of the war between Russia and Ukraine, which means Russia would get some land of Ukraine, make sure that Ukraine doesn't enter NATO, and in exchange, Russia would have to end its military partnership with China and remove its military from the West. So when Mike Pence says you want to give away Ukraine to Russia, to Vivek, that's what he is referring to.
And frankly, our men and women of our armed forces are going to have to go and fight him. I want to let the Ukrainians fight and drive Putin and the Russians back out into Russia.
I want to just briefly address Pence.
Have to make that
Vice
fight.
President Pence. have a newsflash. The USSR does not exist anymore. It fell back in 1990.
Did I say
the real threat? You talked about the communists, and the real communists that we have to address right now.
Do you not have any idea what Vladimir Putin's aims are?
You already spoke. Now I actually have something to say.
Vladimir Putin
30
has
seconds.
been saying he wants to reestablish the old Soviet sphere
You've made
of
your point,
influence.
Vice President.
Vice
Now,
President Pence,
I'm sorry if I insulted him by calling him a communist. He is a dictator and a murderer, and the United States of America needs to stand against authoritarianism.
This is a continuation of the feuds
The
between
real
Mike Pence
threat we
and
face today is
Vivek.
communist China, and we are driving Russia further into China's arms. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest threat we
he
face.
talks about that.
Nobody in either political party is talking about it, and I am the only non-neocon on this stage. But keep us out of war.
Mr. Vice President, we can't hear.
A lot of
Give
attacks.
Russia
It's really ugly at this
Mr.
court.
Vice President.
Give them a promise that Ukraine will never be in NATO, and then somehow
Mr. Vice President.
China will not think about taking Taiwan. We achieve peace through strength.
Mr. Vice President.
That's the main motto of
Okay.
Mike Pence, Nikki
Here we
Haley,
go.
peace through strength.
Establish some
What-
ground rules
When
here,
we
folks.
hear this bell,
Yes.
that means your time's done.
We're done.
So, Mr. Vice President, we appreciate your aggressiveness here.
Peace
30
through
seconds is
strength
30
throughout
seconds.
the
Mr.
world.
Ramaswamy, you were mentioned. You get 30 seconds.
So the reality is that today,
It's a pretty long feud you see
it's not
between
a
Mike
priority
Pence,
for the
Nikki
United
Haley, and
States of America.
Vivek.
And I think that the same people who took us into the Iraq War, the same people who took us into the Vietnam War, you cannot start another no-win war. And I do not want to get to the point where we're sending our military resources abroad when we could be better using them here at home to protect our own borders, protect the homeland.
All right.
That will be my top priority in foreign
And
policy.
we gave you
protect
more
this
than the 30
homeland.
seconds in the rebut. So I do want to get to some other people because everybody, we respect everybody's time here. So, Governor Haley.
Now we go to Nikki
you
Haley.
did not raise your hand, meaning that you would support more funding for the Ukraine war. You have said of Governor DeSantis that you didn't appreciate it when he initially called it a territorial dispute. Why?
First of all, the American president needs to have moral clarity. They need to know the difference between right and wrong. They need to know the difference between good and evil. When you look at the situation with Russia and Ukraine, here you have a pro-American country that was invaded by a thug. So when you want to talk about what has been given to Ukraine, less than 3.5% of our defense budget has been given to Ukraine. If you look at the percentages per GDP, 11 of the European countries have given more than the U.S. But what's really important is go back to when China and Russia held hands, shook hands before the Olympics, and named themselves unlimited partners. A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to
Feud
hand
again
Ukraine to
starts.
Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly...
If you don't know Prigozhin, he was this military leader, militia leader in Russia who started a mini rebellion against Putin. Eventually, the rebellion ended. I believe a lot of Prigozhin's forces went to Belarus and some stayed in Russia. So he was just this mini rebel against Putin, and now there's a plane Prigozhin was in. It was shot down. Prigozhin was killed. So the best assumption we have right now is that Putin killed Prigozhin. That's the story between them, and she's referring to.
This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a
There we
pro-American
go.
country.
First of all, Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 30 seconds. Mr. DeSantis, Governor
Nikki, I
DeSantis,
wish you
you're
well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not on
but
the
the fact
boards
of the
of
matter,
Lockheed and Raytheon. And you know, you
Boeing
have
came
put
off of it,
down
but you've been pushing this
everybody on
lie.
the stage,
You've been pushing
but
this lie all week,
You want
Nikki.
to go and defund Israel? You want to
Okay,
give
let me
Taiwan
address
to
that.
China?
I'm glad you brought that up.
You want to go and give
I'm
Ukraine
going to address
Russia?
each of those right now.
You
This is
say go
false lies of a professional politician. There you have
Under
it.
your watch,
So
you
the
will make
reality is,
America less safe. You have no
Let me-
foreign policy experience, and it shows.
and you know
There
what?
we
The
go.
policy experience that you are
So again, they want to really capitalize on this guy's inexperience. Use that against him as much as possible. Nikki Haley and Mike Pence are essentially a part of the globalist, interventionist foreign policy wing of the GOP. They believe they, along with the others of that wing, believe that they have to send their money and resources wherever it's needed throughout the world, just everywhere it needs to go to try to bolster freedom and democracy. And where Vivek's going on that is essentially, why are we giving so much money and resources to other countries? Let's focus on building our own country's defenses first. So you see this feud between uh, different parts of the GOP. One part says, okay, we need to be more isolationist. That's the more Vivek part, the more Trump like part. We need to be more isolationist, relatively speaking, spend more of our money and resources to help the homeland. And the interventionist wing of Nikki Haley and Mike Pence essentially state that no, we can't be isolationist. We have to help other countries. We have to give our money and resources abroad as much as possible to try to maintain our status as leader of the free world. So you see this growing feud between different sides of the GOP as seen in this debate, and it's materializing between Mike Pence and Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy. Let's try to finish this now.
So our relationship with Israel will never be stronger than by the end of my first term. But it's not a client relationship. It is a friendship. And you know what friends do? Friends help each other stand on their own 2 feet. So I will lead Abraham Accords 2.0. I will partner with Israel to make sure Iran
Abraham Accords was a treaty that which occurred under the Trump administration, which tried to ensure more peace throughout the Middle East. I believe it established some allyship between Middle Eastern countries, tried to bolster defense against terrorism, all that. So that's what he's referring to.
is nuclear armed. But you know what I love about Israel? And I've been there probably in the last 10 years more than most people on this stage. You know what I love about them? I love their border policies. I love their tough on crime policies. I love that they have a national identity and an iron dome to protect their homeland. And so, yes, I want to learn from the friends that we're supporting. And what puzzles me is, I want to learn from those and apply those to protect our homeland, Nikki.
Israel needs America. America needs Israel.
Okay, Governor DeSantis, you were mentioned at the...
Really? Israel doesn't need America? I mean, look, maybe we should reevaluate how much money we're spending to other countries, like Vivek is saying, but Nikki Haley just trying to straight up say, oh, Israel doesn't need America, we need Israel, and so we have to, give resources for our own sake. That's also not completely true. I mean, Israel did need to work with America to really develop a lot of defense systems, but again, that's just a policy viewpoint. So again, you see this feud growing between different parts of the GOP. This new, more conservative, isolationist wing by Vivek Ramaswamy and the other wing, the interventionist, globalist wing of Nikki Haley and Mike Pence. So there is a lot of clamoring on this debate stage during Wednesday night. And now that we've gone over a lot of the feuds between Vivek and Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, let's go over some of the feuds between Vivek and Chris Christie. Chris Christie wasn't able to, really wanted to use the night to try to, go against Trump, consolidate his stature as the anti-Trump Republican. He wasn't able to do that completely because, again, his talking points did not deliver the blows he wanted it to blow. Chris Christie didn't exactly meet expectations of Wednesday night, but let's look at the feud between Vivek and Chris Christie now. And I believe we have to go to, let's see, 22 minutes.
Territorial dispute. Not only.
No, it's not a territorial dispute
President
either.
of the United States.
Right here.
Of actual climate change.
Governor Haley, are you bobbing
is down by
Hold
98% in the last century.
Listen.
I've had it. No,
Wait, hold on.
I've had enough. I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here. And the last person in one of these debates, Brett, who stood in the middle of the stage and said, "What's a skinny guy with an odd last name doing up here?" was Barack Obama, and I'm afraid we're dealing with the same type of amateur standing on stage tonight.
Give me a hug. Give me a hug just like you did to
The
Obama.
same type of amateur.
And you'll help elect me just like you did to Obama, too. Give me that
The
bear
same
hug, brother.
type of amateur.
Hold on. Governor Haley.
Okay, so what do you see Christie do to Vivek? Tries to point him out for his too perfect personality. Oh, you're ChatGPT. And also try to use his inexperience against him, just like what Mike Pence and Nikki Haley did with Vivek, call him out as an amateur. But it was pretty funny what Vivek did to Christie when he said, You want a hug? You want a hug? Because Christie referred to Ramaswamy as Obama, and Christie in the past hugged Obama before and had some sort of political friendship with him. So Ramaswamy really gave that blow back to Christie. Again, Christie wasn't able to do super well in this debate. He was quite underwhelming. A lot of people just expected Christie to really give a hard slam on Trump throughout the debate and really maliciously target any Trump defenders on the stage, and he wasn't really able to get so much momentum, I must say. He didn't really get that Marco Rubio moment, the same kind of moment in which he essentially demolished Marco Rubio during one of the moments during the 2016 Republican primary debates. So, a lot of clamoring during this debate. And, of course, there was also a lot of uncharismatic performances. Doug Burgum, Asa Hutchinson, needless to say, didn't really have anything special to offer. And again, I continue to believe that their candidacies in this playing field, this Republican playing field, just gives a unnecessary dilution of the playing field, and it's really unnecessary why they're wasting their time, their efforts, and their money doing this. Just look for another level of political office which is more appropriate for you. Okay, not everyone gets to be president. You don't have to go this far when it's so obvious right in front of your eyes, that nobody is really giving you much attention. And then Tim Scott, he doesn't really rise to the same level as Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, because again, Mike Pence and Nikki Haley really get more attention through their attacks on Vivek. Nikki Haley, her talks on creating more moderate federal restrictions on abortions, gets her some support among suburban women Republican voters who favor more moderate abortion restrictions. So again, Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, they get more elevated during the debate, but Tim Scott, he does have the traditional Republican talking points, with him, but again, he isn't able to, get as much momentum. He isn't able to spur as much momentum for himself and his candidacy. And then Ron DeSantis, he is essentially plunging more and more towards the backgrounds of this primary every single day. I mean, during this entire debate, he essentially acted like a scripted candidate, a scripted robot, not much original ideas, really just borrowing from the traditional Republican playing book, as well as from some of Trump's policies in regards to immigration. Not much new ideas. He's just a very scripted, he just made himself look like a very scripted, unoriginal candidate on the debate stage, and he failed to get any momentum whatsoever and really was not that distinct or special of a player. And again, I'm not saying much different about Tim Scott, Asa Hutchinson, or Doug Burgum, but if he's going to be like them, then that's the ranks he has to go to at this point, because throughout the debate, he was incredibly scripted, not much originality. Just look at his opening speech, right? So let's find where his opening speech is. It begins in, let's see, 3 minutes 53 seconds. So right here.
Our country is in decline. This decline is not inevitable, it's a choice. We need to send Joe Biden back to his basement and reverse American decline.
America is in decline. This decline is not a choice. We must send Joe Biden to his basement and reverse American decline. Like, beep boo, beep boo. Like, I don't know. You could look through all of his speeches throughout the debate, and if you're a pretty big traditional Republican, you don't really care much beyond, seeing a candidate who has traditional, regular Republican policies. You may look at DeSantis and think, fine, he's totally fine, but again, how is he more special in that case than, say, Tim Scott? And again, I understand he has had a pretty rough beginning to this debate, a pretty, arguably, some people may argue, embarrassing beginning to this debate because of the leaked memo, which really caused him to reboot. But Ron DeSantis has been rebooting his campaign a lot of times, and he hasn't been faring well with the Republican voters. He's not an excellent communicator. He's not that good of an articulator as Vivek Ramaswamy, not by a long shot. I mean, immigration is one thing I guess you could say he's a bit more unique on, using the military, however controversial that may sound. Really flip-floppy on foreign policy, extremely weak there. Uses regular, usual talking points on taxation and spending, and that's just all. And the lowest point for him, the most pathetic point for him, was when the debate moderators asked all the candidates to raise their hand if they would support Trump as the Republican nominee for president, even if he was convicted for any of the charges pressed against him from his legal cases. Let's go to that moment. It's at 45:53. And right here.
Brief moment and talk about the elephant not in the room.
Former President Trump has been indicted in 4 different states on 91 counts. He will be processed tomorrow in Georgia at the Fulton County Jail for charges relating to the 2020 election loss.
You all signed a pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee. If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
Did you just look at that? When Ron DeSantis was asked if he would support Trump as the nominee, even if Trump was convicted, instead of deciding on his own whether or not he would raise his hand, he looked around the stage to see whether or not people were raising their hands, and then raised his hand. He looked around the stage to see if other people raised their hands, and then he raised his hand. I mean, the Trump indictments are a pretty sensitive and important issue, at least for the Republican primary. And if you're going to be a leading candidate, you should be able to come up with a firm, original, and defensible stance on this issue. And he wasn't even able to do that. He couldn't make his own position on this issue. He had to look around the stage to see if anybody raised their hands and then raised his hand. Let's go back again, back to the moment when they were asked, and just re-examine it again.
Crane, immigration, education. But we are going to take a brief moment and talk about the elephant not in the room.
Former President Trump has been indicted in 4 different states on 91 counts. He will be processed tomorrow in Georgia at the Fulton County Jail for charges relating to the 2020 election loss.
You all signed a pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee. If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
So, when asked the question, Vivek Ramaswamy is the first to raise his hand. And then the crowd applauds, and Vivek is really able to command that applaud because he was the one who first raised his hand, the highest, I believe. And then, just after looking, Ron DeSantis would raise his hand. After looking at Vivek and everybody else, he raised his hand. Couldn't even come up with his own stance on that issue. He had to look at Vivek and then raise his hand. I mean, this is just an example of why DeSantis, is not that distinct of a player, is not that unique as of a player in this primary. And this is why he's not able to connect to voters as well, because he's not able to make his own stance even on issues like this. And you saw this problem with foreign policy as well, in which he was like quite flip-floppy on the Ukraine war. When as governor, DeSantis, spent months building his image as the main Republican leader in opposition to Trump, the main Trump alternative leader. He spent months building this momentum, building this energy, building this image as the person who could beat Trump in the primary. And now he's just dwelled so low to this sadly pathetic moment for him and his candidacy. And now, he can't really think for himself on issues like this. And he's lost that momentum. He's lost that energy. He's lost it to Vivek Ramaswamy. And he just sold it away to Vivek Ramaswamy the moment he looked at him, and the moment Vivek was really able to command the crowds at that moment specifically, and he just cowardly raised his hand after looking at him. Like, he's lost that momentum now, and now it's just in Ramaswamy's hands. And again, it's a pretty sad thing for his campaign. And if you don't care about this, if you're a traditional Republican voter, you may not have a problem with it, but it just goes to show he's not that strong of a player anymore. And he's really lost a lot of his momentum, mainly to Ramaswamy, I would say. And again, some of the other players who may have been able to build their own, stature throughout the debate. I mean, Nikki Haley, she was able to gain some ground among the more traditional, moderate Republicans, particularly suburban women. Chris Christie, again, his performance was quite mediocre, but he'll still hold on to that anti-Trump base. But DeSantis, he's really fallen down. And again, it's a bit upsetting for, to think about that, to see, because he was an extremely promising leader. And you know to have to go to this moment in which you have to look around the room for an issue like this and not be able to come up with your own answer, that's quite pathetic, in my opinion. So let's talk about what this debate and what the night as a whole means for the Republican primary as a whole. This Republican primary is quite extraordinary and quite rare because it is, in a very long time at least, the first major Republican primary. And when I say major Republican primary, the Republican primary not happening during the first term of an incumbent Republican president, because during the first term of an incumbent Republican president, that incumbent is all but sure to win the Republican primary then. But this is the first major Republican primary in which you already still have the incumbent party leader running. Donald Trump is the incumbent leader of the Republican Party. It doesn't matter who heads the RNC, it doesn't matter who the RNC chair is, he is still the incumbent party leader. And he's running and he's leading by 40 plus points against the second best performer in the polls, who is Ron DeSantis, who has been falling miserably on the polls. If there's going to be any chance of the incumbent being defeated in a primary like this, there has to be one contender, one opponent, one candidate who is not going to be embedded in the clamors, or is not going to be embedded in any non-charisma performance during debates like these, because they need to hold a command on Republican voters equal to or superior to that of the incumbent. They cannot afford any clamors. They cannot afford any non-charisma. There has to be one candidate who could do that. And in this debate, we didn't see that. We didn't see any candidate who was able to show that, because Vivek Ramaswamy, for all the strength, I'll say, he has as a Republican candidate, for all the energy and charisma he does have, he was still getting teared down by Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, and to some extent, Chris Christie. He was really embedded in those clamors, and it made him be more hostile to those candidates which turned off some Republican voters, and he wasn't able to hold as much command as he could have without those clamors. He got embedded into those clamors, which made it difficult for him to hold on to a strong command on the voters. Nikki Haley, again, she's able to do her best with suburban women at this point, who appreciated her for her moderate stance to a federal abortion restriction law, and she was able to gain some ground with, I would say, traditional Republicans, or globalist or interventionist Republicans. Again, beyond that, she hasn't been able to materialize anything. Mike Pence, I don't think anybody's going to be that sympathetic to him anymore during the primary. He was just able to make a name for himself because he was attacking Vivek Ramaswamy. He didn't completely succeed in that, but that's his story. Tim Scott, not much momentum. Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum, they're out of the race. Ron DeSantis, no charisma, no distinction. And Chris Christie, I don't think anybody is going to be that sympathetic to him at this point. He doesn't really have much of a vision. He doesn't even have much of a policy direction he could guide voters on. So, also not that serious of candidate. There's nobody who really could have proved to have had a strong, indisputable command on the voters. And as a result, Donald Trump won the night without even having to be in the debates. Even the amount of views Trump's debate with Tucker got is enough to show how much command and exposure he has among the public as a whole, and of course, including GOP voters. This debate got, say, about 50 plus million views, right? So, say perhaps between 50 and maybe on the higher end 80 million views if a lot of people watched it in the days after. Maybe it could reach up to 100 million views. Maybe it has. But Trump's interview with Tucker Carlson received 255.1 million views, and let's see whether this is the latest metric. 257 million views. 257 million. That is more than 2/3 of the US population. So, as far as I'm concerned, Trump still has a far more superior level of command and exposure on the GOP playing field. And as I had hinted to before, not attending the debates really makes Trump seem like more of a candidate who's essentially above all of the supposedly, you could say, pathetic dogfighting which we saw in some way, shape, or form on Wednesday night. And in one of my previous videos, I actually talked about how important it is for Trump to really create a strong and effective messaging strategy and mechanism to really get his messaging out to voters, assuming he wins the Republican nomination, because the media, and more specifically the liberal media networks, are really going to hammer Trump about in regards to his legal cases during 2024. And utilizing platforms such as Twitter, working with media allies such as Tucker Carlson, in which he is essentially able to get his message out directly without much filtering from the media. And even Elon Musk is quicker to point this out when he comments on the video. Interesting to hear things directly versus through the media filter. He is building up a very strong messaging strategy and mechanism. And you know what? The more Trump is able to accomplish messaging efforts like this, the more he's going to grow his command and exposure on not just the GOP electorate, but the general public and the general electorate as a whole. And as such, from the dynamics we could interpret as a whole from Wednesday night's debate and even this interview, it seems all but certain as of now that Trump's going to win the 2024 Republican primary. So, thank you all for watching this video. Please make sure to like the video, leave a comment because your opinions are always appreciated on this channel. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all and have a nice day.